Good morning. It is Monday, May the 27th, Memorial Day, and this is The Drill. Good morning, and thank you very much. My name is Ronald T. Hardgrove, and my podcast is about the difference between being a true conservative and being a reactionary. It's about what true conservatism is and why it matters. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. What's a true conservative? Being truly conservative is about integrity. It's about how one lives, not just how one votes. It's not just a political but a philosophical position. True conservatism is fundamentally about being realistic, and being realistic is fundamentally about making the presumption for the status quo. Who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is a lifestyle. They are patriotic people who use common sense. They trust their judgment, speak clearly and definitively, and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They are consistent, credible, and influential. Not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. Who are the reactionaries? They are the people that think that they are conservative because of where they stand on the issues. This is wrong. This kind of thinking is what Ayn Rand referred to as definition by non-essentials, and what Sister Miriam Joseph referred to as definition by accidents. How somebody thinks about an issue is less important than how they arrive at their conclusion. They arrive at the position because they make the presumption for change. They are idealistic, left and wrong. If they arrive at their conclusion by making the presumption for the status quo, they are realistic, conservative, and right. What about objectivists and libertarians? Objectivists and libertarians are idealistic. Objectivists want an ideally objective world, and libertarians want an ideally free world. Both of them are basically the opposite side of the same coin as socialists. Since any idealistic idea requires the initiation of the use of force in order to be potent, of the three idealisms noted, only socialists are a political threat. Let me be clear. Being truly conservative is realistic, effective, and true. Anything else is idealistic, ineffective, and false. Or to put it more simply, being truly conservative is right, and everything else is wrong. So what? What difference does it make how one defines the word conservative? It matters because socialism is only a force today because of the right. If the average person on the right knew how the left really operated, then socialism would be dead in America today. And basically, if anybody on the right that truly understood what conservatism was about, they wouldn't be making the mistakes that they're making today. How does the left consistently defeat the right and remain a force in American politics? The left can only remain viable with the help of the right, by tricking the right using psychological tools and techniques into doing the left's work for it, by manipulating, bullying, and intimidating. What should a true conservative do? The first thing to know is what a true conservative should not do. A true conservative must not put politics first and realize that the battle is cultural. Culture informs politics, not the other way around. Understand the left's psychologistic tools. Understand that the left wants you to do their work for them. They want you to spread the disease, to mimic their communication styles and content. They want you to prove yourself, to prove that change is not necessary. They want you to waste your time and incriminate yourself. Waste time by wrestling with arbitrary claims. Incriminate yourself by trying to prove a negative. In essence, trying to prove that you're not a racist, misogynist, homophobe, etc. And the psychologistic tricks are arbitrary claims, curiosity, tone of voice, suggestion, acting as if, assuming the close, storytelling, verbal picture painting. They also use the myth of the middle ground and crime prevention, as well as polls and surveys. The crime prevention part of it, what I mean by that is that any type or effort by the government to prevent crime necessarily and always involves violating the individual rights of its residents, citizens, etc. Necessarily. So if you're going to try and prevent gun violence, the only way for the government to prevent gun violence is by violating the Second Amendment in some way, shape, or form. If you're going to try and prevent people from using hateful language, you're trying to prevent people from doing that, it necessarily involves violating the First Amendment. Now, individuals can prevent crime, they can prevent the things that I've just suggested. For instance, if they want to deal with, one of the ways of dealing with gun violence is by deciding that they don't want to go certain places, staying out of certain areas. Maybe they want to go as far as arming themselves, wearing body armor, something of that nature. With hate speech, then again, they can avoid people that have a tendency to speak that way. I know I'm turned off every time when I hear people use certain phrases or words, and I just make a mental note that this is not a person that's going to be a friend of mine. So those are the things that we're talking about when we're getting into being a true conservative. It's the pundits, the Rush Limbaughs, the Sean Hannitys of the world don't understand what true conservatism is all about. They're conservatives because of where they stand on the issues, and therefore they're going to go ahead and put the cart before the horse. And they get themselves into a lot of trouble and back themselves into a lot of corners, debate-wise, by doing that. So my Op Hawkeye remembrance of the day, memorial of the day, is for Staff Sergeant Joshua R. Whitaker, who is a U.S. Army veteran born in March 10th, 1984, and was killed May 15th, 2007 in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. He was awarded the Bronze Star Medal and the Purple Heart. And that, again, was U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Joshua R. Whitaker that we remember today. And that brings us to the concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon. It's a book of Ayn Rand's concepts and abstractions that she used. It's basically, it says on the cover, Objectivism from A to Z, edited by Harry Binswanger. The concept of the day today is deficit financing. The government has no source of revenue except the taxes paid by the producers. To free itself, for a while, from the limits set by reality, the government initiates a credit con game on a scale which the private manipulator could not dream of. It borrows money from you today, which is to be repaid with money it will borrow from you tomorrow, which is to be repaid with money it will borrow from you the day after tomorrow, and so on. This is known as deficit financing. It is made possible by the fact that the government cuts the connection between goods and money. It issues paper money, which is issued as a claim check on actually existing goods, but that money is not backed by any goods. It's not backed by gold. It is backed by nothing. It is a promissory note issued to you in exchange for your goods to be paid by you in the form of taxes out of your future production. A couple of things that she forgot. Number one is that how you might think to yourself, gee, how does this scheme work? And it works by virtue of the fact of something called the legal tender law. Without this law, the paper money would probably go out of style pretty quick. But the legal tender law basically forces everyone in the country to accept dollars, and it says that you must. That's why it says on it, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So you're forced to accept it. You cannot, for instance, open a store and then put up a sign that says we only accept gold. Okay, you want to buy something from us? Fine. We'll take only gold, or say silver, gold and silver. you would be in violation of the law, and I don't know what the penalties are, whether or not you would be civilly or criminally liable, but you would be in violation of the law. And without that, it wouldn't, the dollar, the whole idea of paper money wouldn't work. So the other thing that she forgets to note here is the reason that all this is being done. Deficit financing is part of something called Keynesian economics. And the idea of Keynesian economics is to try to smooth out the business cycle. It was noted by many people that while we were on the gold standard, there was a lot of what they called boom and bust cycles, in which we would be doing very well economically, business would be up, unemployment's down, everybody's having a good time, and then eventually something occurs to cause the market to take a tumble. 1929, it was a stock market crash, and we ended up going into a depression. And that's the way kind of our economy worked. We went from boom cycles to depressions and recessions. And the idea of Keynesian economics is to set up a system whereby everybody will, or your children will, be able to do better than you did, and their children will do better than they, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what they call ever-increasing prosperity. They're trying to create, I guess, the perfect economic world, a world with all ups and no downs. And this system has failed. It's failed miserably. You make the presumption for the status quo, and you look at Keynesian economics, and you say, okay, well, why was it put in place? It was put in place to smooth out the economy and get rid of depressions and recessions. It's failed. It has failed over and over and over again. As lately as 2008, we had a huge recession. And so the system has failed, and it should be replaced. I think that if we're going to experiment with a new economic models or whatever, perhaps, but in the meantime, the most viable option is to go back to the gold standard. So, other than that, it's a good, again, concept, deficit financing, and I like to read from her book, the Ayn Rand Lexicon, because, first of all, it gives you more of an insight into what it is that she's talking about. Sometimes her writing can be a little bit awkward. So having a book like this, a lexicon, so we can understand what it is that she's getting at sometimes is a good idea. So it's also because modern men and women are conceptual and abstract. We have too much of a tendency, the trend in the country is to move the other direction, to move to storytelling and verbal picture painting, which is backwards and unnecessary and inefficient. So, one of the things that I was listening to was a Hugh Hewitt episode, I believe, and they were talking about, I believe they were talking about giving advice to, I guess, Republican candidates, perhaps Democrat candidates as well, on how to deal with the candidacy of Joe Biden. And so there was a guest that Mr. Hewitt had on, and the guest was saying that the way you've got to deal with Joe Biden is by saying that you trust Joe Biden on this, but you don't trust him on that, and that type of thing. And throughout the guest's advice, he never once, again, makes a value statement. It can't be overemphasized how valueless, for lack of a better term, our society has become. How we fail to communicate in terms of values. Part of the overall strategy of the left is to influence psychologistically the way we communicate. Because if you, the way we communicate is going to determine the way we act, and the way we act is going to determine the way, eventually, the way we vote. Why do we have Miss Cortez in New York? Because a lot of people have been influenced into thinking that she is a perfectly acceptable candidate and representative. She would not have been able to get elected 20 years ago, 50 years ago. She wouldn't have been able, she would be unelectable if she came out and said the things that she has said, and she would be probably laughed out of Congress if she did manage somehow to get elected. So again, too many pundits, Hugh Hewitt in this case and his guest, are not making a value statement. What they should be saying, instead of advising candidates, well, talk about how you trust him here, but you don't trust him there. No, you need to come out and tell America, is this candidacy valid? Is this a good candidacy? Is Joe Biden's candidacy good for America? Is it good for the Democrat Party? Is it good for the United States? Is he going to would he make a good president? Why or why not? That's what you need to do. You need to be bold and explicit in it. Otherwise, you fail to communicate. What they're doing, if you're going to take what's a very bland approach to this, is you take the risk of advising your supporters to vote for Joe Biden. Okay? You're taking the risk that that's the message they're going to come away with. That a lot of times, yes means the absence, people take it as the absence of no. If somebody doesn't tell me no, I'm going to take it as a yes. Okay, so should I vote for Joe Biden? Well, what I'd tell you is, I trust Joe Biden on this, but I don't trust him on that. And I trust him over here, but not over there. I trust him with this, but not with that. Okay, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. Why not? You haven't told me that I should not vote for him, and why I should not vote for him. There used to be in this country, when I was growing up, that was automatic. People did it all the time. People did that all the time. And what it is about don't make judgments. Don't judge. And this is the result you end up with, is you end up with bland conversations. You end up with basically an inability to communicate. Because if you can't make judgments, you can't make a point. And if you're not making a point, you're not communicating. If you're not communicating, then why bother to open your mouth in the first place? And generally speaking, that's the idea. If they can get the vast majority of people in this country to just shut up and do as they're told, the left wins. And that's why I say the way to defeat socialism, it has to be done retail. You and I have to do it. It's not going to happen because of the politicians. It's not going to happen because of the pundits. It's not going to happen because of the media. It's going to be you and I defeating socialism with the people that we run into and meet each and every day, our relatives, our friends, our coworkers. And by simply making value statements, by simply coming out and judging, you're going to be prepared. You're going to hear people say, don't judge. And my typical response to that is, why not? You do. Shuts them up every time. Or you can just simply ask, really? Why not? True conservatives are open-minded. Okay, why shouldn't I judge? And they won't be able to explain it to you because they don't want to explain it. They don't want to get into debates because, again, for them, that's not the point. For them, the point is power, getting people to do what they want, when they want, how they want it. So also I was thinking about over the weekend, I've touched on this before, but I wanted to bring it up again. There's a lot of, I hear on the radio particularly, a lot of people saying, wow, the world seems insane. Everything seems crazy. And if you listen carefully, if you study a little bit of philosophy, you can kind of piece things together and realize it's not insane at all in certain aspects. There are other aspects in which, yes, it is, but at least you know what direction that things are going and why. For instance, the idea of being a non-gender. The people that come out and say, well, I'm not male, I'm not female, I'm something else. One of the things to realize from the 60s, in the 60s, there was came the advent of post-Marxism and the idea that any oppressed group could lead the revolution. And so women and minorities, but particularly women, were considered an oppressed group. That males have exercised power throughout world history. They have dominated and subjugated women, blah, 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 much to women's detriment, etc., etc. BS. It's absolute BS, because you can find many cases of women that are queens and in leadership positions all over the place. But anyways, women can then, if they're oppressed, then we need to, the left needs to make sure that they're liberated from their oppressions. And so they came up with at least two ideas that were supposed to empower women. The left talks about that all the time, empowerment. We will empower you. And they were going to empower women by getting abortion legalized, Roe v. Wade, and with the use of the pill. As women can then take charge of their own contraception. So what ended up happening, because again, the point of all of this was to empower women, but to do so at the expense of men. At the expense of men. That's key, because that's not what happened. Gloria Steinem said it herself. She said that all of the gains made by women in the women's movement have benefited men. And that has driven lefties crazy. They just, they've gone absolutely crazy. And they go and they think and they think and they think, how can we find a way to empower women and at the same time not empower men or make men's lives better? And the answer really is you can't. Men and women are inseparable. We have a world with men and women. What benefits one is going to benefit the other in general. And so that's when they finally realized, that there's no way to benefit women at the expense of men, that men have got to go. Men have got to go. And the way they're going to do that, how can you get rid of men? You can't get rid of men by putting them in concentration camps or internment camps. That's not going to work. What else are you going to do? You're going to have laws that mean in which a woman has to abort every male child. Well, that's not going to cut it either. That's not going to happen. So how do you get rid of men? And the way to do that is conceptually. When you no longer have the words man and woman, and you no longer think in the terms of male and female and men and women, men are essentially gone. Unfortunately for the left, so are women. So there's still no way in which you're going to be empowering women at the expense of men. But this is what they think. They think that it's going to be, simply get and promote the idea of a non-gender world, obliterating the concept of men and maleness. And another way to do it is, of course, is to redefine masculinity. They talk about right now toxic masculinity, and there is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's just right and wrong. If you're a man or a woman, and you can either do the right things or you can do the wrong things. If men act like beasts and run around beating people up and beating women and turning them into prostitutes or whatever, that's wrong. It's immoral and it needs to stop. And it's not because of a male hegemony or female hegemony, but because it's just simply wrong. But again, for the left, in which everything is looked through the prism of power, and women have to be empowered, and it has to be done at the expense of men, the only way to get rid of men is by getting rid of the conception of maleness and masculinity. So you can do that by having men and women that refuse to identify. I'm not a man, I'm not a woman. And also by redefining masculinity so that men become gradually more and more feminine. If everybody's feminine, nobody's masculine. And I guess that would be to sum it up, that the point isn't so much getting rid of men as it is getting rid of masculinity, that becomes the left's problem. So that's a little glimpse or a little insight into the way the left thinks. The same thing applies to race with regards to blacks, for instance, that there was the Civil Rights Act that were giving rights, restoring the rights of blacks in our society, but was supposed to be, the whole idea was supposed to empower blacks at the expense of whites. And again, it failed to do so. In a lot of the cases, whites ended up doing just as well or better than blacks did. That, in other words, the civil rights movements benefited not only blacks, but it benefited whites and actually benefited everybody. And that's no good for the lefties. Good for everybody else. Any normal person would think, hey, that's a good thing. The lefties don't think that way. And they also sat down and think, how can we benefit blacks and colored people, as Asians or blacks or Hispanics, at the expense of whites? And they realized it's impossible. And so there's been at least one Harvard College professor that has come out and advocated the destruction of the white race. And so you have the same kinds of issues where it's going to be, you can't just round everybody up and stick them in a concentration camp, but you can do things that a little bit more subtle and nuanced to go ahead and eliminate whites or whiteness conceptually. And also one of the things that they've actually overtly done is come out and encourage white women and men to have interracial relationships and thereby get rid of whiteness eventually by interracial unions. But that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, I thank you very much for listening, and have a memorable Memorial Day.